I want to dig into the EV tax credit part of this conversation. I know it's one piece that's really dominated my reporting over the last year. Just to clarify for any audience members who don't follow it as closely as some of us do, the IRA revised the consumer tax credit for new EV purchases while creating two other credits for used and commercial or leased EVs. The tax credit for new EVs, known as 30D, comes with the most restrictions, as it not only sets limits on MSRP and buyer income, but also final assembly and sourcing requirements for battery components and critical minerals, making it much tougher for vehicles to be eligible. And I want to toss this question maybe to Jennifer and Dan first. How have these eligibility restrictions affected automakers' EV strategies, and what are they doing to make sure their vehicles qualify, especially as the EV battery content rules get tougher each year? And Jennifer, maybe we can start with you, just given that a lot of your members' EVs don't qualify right now, just given the North American assembly requirement.
Yeah, sure, happy to take that first. There's no question there's a lot of requirements that were put on the 30D credit, to receive the 30D credit. I'd like to say that it is only available for specific vehicles and specific consumers. And so there's a lot of limitations put on it. But I will say, and of course, as soon as the law was signed, immediately the final assembly in North America piece came into effect. And so you're right, for a lot of models that were out there, they no longer, you could not get the credit, whereas you could have the day before. And so that was tough. I will say 45W though, which is the leasing, the commercial leasing provision that's in the IRA, has been helpful in that regard, because a consumer can lease a vehicle. It doesn't have all those same restrictions and requirements that the 30D credit does. And so that has really given us the time that's needed, that transition period, to get all of the sourcing requirements for consumers to better understand what they're eligible for. They can lease a vehicle, and there's a lot more models and choices they can choose from, and there's no restrictions on consumers. So I will tell you, my members have been working very diligently to try to determine exactly what the rules are. Treasury has been a little slow in putting out some of the guidance, and we're still waiting for guidance on exactly what they need to do to qualify, to get their vehicles qualified. So it's a work in progress, and it's taking time. But there are several of my members' vehicles that receive partial or full credit right now. It wasn't like that immediately, but as time has gone on, they've been able to do that, and I expect to see many more vehicles who can receive some or all of the credit.
Dan, anything to add?
Just a couple things. I think some of Jennifer and my shared members was exactly that. Many of them had announced investments into the U.S. to have their electric vehicle production here. It wasn't ready in August of 2022, so immediately they were disqualified. I do think we're going to see more vehicles coming online that can meet those requirements. I do also think that, and Mohammed and Deanna can probably testify to this, the OEMs are asking a lot more questions about the supply chain of their tier 1, tier 2. They're getting down to tier 3, tier 4, where those minerals are coming from that go into the batteries. So I think it's becoming more of a transparency issue as well of where exactly these materials are being sourced. So I think we're seeing more of those, or likely seeing more of those conversations.
Yeah, and I kind of want to dig into that with Mohammed and Deanna a little bit. What do these restrictions, especially on EV battery sourcing, mean for suppliers? Are they triggering a restructuring of supply chains, more localization of supply chains? Deanna, let's start with you.
Yeah, so I think in implementation, there's always opportunities to improve, and I think we're experiencing that across the board. Guidance, like delayed guidance, and trying to actually make decisions as you're waiting for guidance, that can be challenging. But as a domestic battery manufacturer, the intent of the law that allows a company like One that is also then putting that emphasis on developing a North American material supply chain from the ground up, and that supply chain is also being built from the ground up. It's given us also an advantage in the market, which I think is the intent, is to allow for domestic American battery manufacturing to be birthed and to grow. So I think the intent of the law is supportive of that, and then I do agree that we need to think about the gradients that move the market, that move people towards decisions. I think restricting consumer choice is inherently challenging, especially when the consumer choice is like not all the way met with EVs as they stand today, which is something else that we're very focused on. So I do think that we have benefited from it, and then it's also challenging to build that North American supply chain that then meets all of the requirements. It's not without its challenges. I think the addition of the free trade agreement countries like Korea and Japan have been very valuable because then it allows for a stepping stone before you have to fully localize supply chain here. But it is absolutely going to take time, and I do echo and empathize with the implementation challenges.
Mohammed, what about you?
So I think it's easy to craft the law and to sign it, and you do the good advertisement and campaign about it. The issue with that is you translate it into action, and to release the guidance from the Department of Energy or Department of Commerce or Transportation to make sure that this translates into actions, it becomes a little bit difficult. But what we're seeing is to secure supply chain in North America or in the US specifically, we're seeing a lot of the manufacturing start to rebuild in North America. What the IRA does now is able to offer certain incentive for this supply chain to localize, which means you can reduce the cost by creating the demand or the pressure up front for the back end to drop with new facilities as well as new suppliers for this material that's required, either for casting, steel, aluminum. It's not just batteries, it's a lot to take to build the AV. Beside that, also the local content that requires to meet certain requirement from the USMCA becomes on the top of that. So building that supply chain from almost zero to 50, 60, and 70% content related, it requires a little bit of patience and a little bit of transitory period. So when you see the inflation itself, you have the structural part, and the structural part can get compensated by the IRA incentive for building the manufacturing and the supply chain locally.